6:23 a.m. The Persian Gulf. A U.S. naval convoy, 3 vessels, 72 nautical miles southeast of Kuwait. Iran just launched a drone strike. Not one drone, not two, 26. Welcome to Navy Beacon, where we break down the operations that define sea power. A naval convoy in the Persian Gulf is never truly alone. Above it, if the threat picture warrants, there are aircraft. Ahead of it, a warship screen. In the communications stack, there are links to theater air defense, to E-2C Hawkeye early warning aircraft, to the satellite architecture that ties every U.S. military asset in the region into a single picture. But the picture is only as good as the data feeding it, and on the morning of the drone attack, the data had a gap. The convoy in question was moving under a standard escort configuration. USS Gravely, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, leading 3 vessels, a combat logistics force oiler, an ammunition ship, and a prepositioning vessel. On a resupply run from Jebel Ali, UAE, toward a forward operating position in the northern Gulf, the cargo aboard those 3 ships was significant. The oiler, USNS Guadalupe, carried 173,000 barrels of naval distillate fuel. The ammunition ship, USNS Wali Shirah, had been loaded with 3 days of complete strike ordnance for a carrier air wing. The prepositioning vessel was carrying vehicle and equipment sets for a Marine Expeditionary Brigade. In a shooting war, this convoy represented 4 to 6 weeks of sustained combat power for U.S. forces in theater. That made it a target. Iranian drone doctrine had been developing for years. The Shahed 136, a loitering munition with a 50-kilogram warhead, had demonstrated its effectiveness against armored vehicles and fixed infrastructure in multiple conflicts. But the Shahed's weakness was radar cross-section and speed. It flew at approximately 185 kilometers per hour, a slow detectable target for a properly alerted air defense system. The IRGC knew this. They had studied every engagement in which Shahed drones had been intercepted. They knew the intercept geometry, the engagement timelines, the defensive radar coverage footprints, and they had designed the attack specifically to exploit a gap. At 4:45 a.m., 98 minutes before the first drone crossed the maritime boundary, a commercial maritime AIS tracker that 5th Fleet Monitoring Systems tracked showed a medium-sized Dow-class vessel departing from a small port facility 40 kilometers northeast of Bandar Lenga. The vessel was logged as a commercial fishing dhow. Its AIS signal was consistent with dozens of similar vessels operating daily in the Gulf. Nothing unusual. The vessel was not a fishing dhow. It was a modified launch platform. Civilian hull, civilian AIS, carrying 18 Shahed 136 drones in 2 concealed containers on its deck. 8 additional Shahed 136 had been launched 90 minutes earlier from a coastal installation, a pre-positioned staging site 20 kilometers inland that had been constructed deliberately to appear as an agricultural building complex on satellite imagery. 26 total drones, 2 separate launch origins. Time to arrive at the convoy's projected position simultaneously, from different approach vectors. The tactic had a name in Iranian planning documents, translated loosely, the net. The first indication that something was wrong came not from radar. It came from a surface ship. USNS Guadalupe's watch officer, a merchant mariner with a military auxiliary contract, was on the bridge at 6:21 a.m. when she noticed something anomalous on the ship's commercial radar. Small contacts, moving in a group, bearing 045 degrees, range approximately 22 nautical miles. She called the bridge of USS Gravely on bridge-to-bridge radio. Gravely, this is Guadalupe. I have multiple small air contacts, 22 miles, bearing 045. They're not on AIS. Looks like birds to me, but I've never seen birds in that formation. The tactical action officer aboard Gravely, Lieutenant Commander Park, pulled up the AN/SPY 1D picture immediately. The contacts were there. But the radar system's automatic tracking logic had been classifying them as clutter. The SPY-1D's moving target indicator algorithms were tuned for surface search optimization in the Gulf's shallow, refractive environment. The slow-moving, low RCS contacts had been generating tracks that the system's own filter was discarding as false returns. There were 17 contacts in the 045 bearing group. The second group, 9 contacts from 310 degrees northwest, was not yet in radar range. Lieutenant Commander Park had 40 seconds to decide whether to call General Quarters before the contact's identity was confirmed. He called it. General quarters at 6:22 and 11 seconds a.m. The incoming contacts were still 19 nautical miles away, flying at 185 kilometers per hour. Time to impact, approximately 6 minutes. It is worth pausing on what 6 minutes means for a ship's air defense team. 6 minutes sounds like time. It is not time. It is a cascade of simultaneous decisions that have to happen correctly in sequence, or the entire defense collapses. Weapons free authorization, target priority assignment, engagement sequence, coordination with other ships, communication with any available aircraft, deconfliction of fire. In 6 minutes, USS Gravely had to account for 17 confirmed contacts in one bearing and an unknown number of contacts in a second bearing that were not yet on the radar picture. At 6:23 a.m., the E-2C Hawkeye, operating 150 miles south, picked up the second group and called it to Gravely. 9 contacts, bearing 310, range 41 miles, flight profile consistent with slow-moving drones, 26 total. Gravely's missile magazines were loaded for a typical Gulf patrol, not a mass drone intercept. The SM-6 standard missile in the VLS cells was the primary long-range intercept weapon, but SM-6s are designed for fast maneuvering targets. Using them against slow drones at 185 kilometers per hour is geometrically possible, but ordnance inefficient. A $4 million missile against a $20,000 target. More critically, Gravely carried a finite number of SM-6. Against 26 drones, salvo management was existential. The ESSM, Evolved Sea Sparrow missile, was faster to task and more economical against slow targets at closer range. Each quad pack held 4 missiles in a single VLS cell. Gravely had 24 ESSMs loaded, 24 ESSMs against 26 drones. That math only works if every shot hits. It does not work if the defense is saturated. USS Gravely's commanding officer, Commander Thomas Akers, faced the exact scenario that Iranian planners had designed. He needed air support, now. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets, Viper 31 and Viper 32, were on Alert 5 aboard USS Gerald R. Ford, operating 210 miles south in the Gulf of Oman. The Ford was technically outside theater for this specific tasking, but the on-call strike coordination had been prearranged. At 6:24 a.m., with the first group of drones now 14 nautical miles out, Viper 31 and Viper 32 launched. Flight time to the engagement zone at maximum speed, 11 minutes. The first drones would arrive in 4. Commander Akers now faced the decision that would define the next 7 minutes of his life. He had 4 minutes until first wave contact, 11 minutes until air support. That was a 7-minute gap where Gravely was the only active defense for a convoy carrying enough combat supplies to sustain a war. 3 options were on the table. Option A, engage the first group with ESSMs at maximum range, accepting the expenditure of 12 to 14 missiles, and hope the remaining supply was sufficient for the second group arriving from the northwest. Option B, hold ESSM fire until 8 nautical miles, accepting closer engagement range, but improving intercept probability, and conserving ordnance for the second wave. Option C, position the convoy ships in a modified diamond formation to reduce the targeting geometry available to the incoming drones, accepting reduced maneuverability, but complicating the strike calculation. The decision could not wait. Drop your answer in the comments, A, B, or C, because Commander Akers made his call while those drones were still closing at 185 kilometers per hour. He chose a hybrid approach that the after-action report would describe as tactically sound but operationally costly. He held ESSM fire to 10 nautical miles, not 8, not maximum range, and simultaneously ordered the convoy into a modified formation that put Guadalupe behind Gravely's stern, reducing the oiler's exposure. The first ESSM launched at 6:26:04 a.m. against the lead drone contact at 9.8 nautical miles. Miss. The intercept geometry on a target flying at 185 kilometers per hour at 50 feet of altitude, at close range, with a pursuing missile going supersonic, generated a shot that passed behind the target by an estimated 12 meters. The ESSM's proximity fuse did not detonate. The second ESSM hit. Third drone in the formation. ESSM hit. Detonation. Confirmed kill at 8.1 nautical miles. The fourth, fifth, sixth ESSMs worked through the formation. 4 hits, 2 misses. 9 drones remaining in the first wave. At 6:27:30 a.m., the Phalanx CIWS mounts opened up against the closest contacts as they entered the 5 nautical mile threshold. The autonomous systems were fighting their own battle, tracking, engaging, adjusting, without crew intervention. At 6:27:44 a.m., the second wave from 310 degrees entered ESSM range. Gravely was fighting in 2 directions simultaneously with 6 ESSMs remaining. Viper 31 arrived at 6:35 a.m., 11 minutes late to the engagement's opening phase but arriving with AMRAAMs loaded. 4 drones from the first group had survived the ESSM and Phalanx gauntlet and were inside 2 nautical miles of Guadalupe when Viper 31 engaged them with AIM-120 AMRAAMs. 1 hit, 2 misses. The 4th drone closed to 800 meters of Guadalupe before the Phalanx detonated it at close range. The debris field from that detonation, including the forward section of a Shahed 136 airframe, still carrying residual propellant, impacted Guadalupe's port deck. It did not detonate the drone's warhead, but the burning wreckage started a deck fire that the crew contained in 11 minutes. Of the 26 drones launched, 22 were destroyed. 4 reached their targets. 1 hit USNS Wally Shira's superstructure at 6:28 a.m. The 50-kilogram warhead detonated against the ship's secondary bridge structure. Structural damage. 5 crew members injured, 2 seriously. The ship remained operable. 1 hit USS Gravely. The drone impacted the ship's after-deck house, the area housing secondary communications equipment and berthing spaces. 6 sailors were injured. 1, Petty Officer 2nd Class James Okafor, died at the scene from blast injuries. 2 drones hit the water within 100 meters of convoy vessels without causing hull damage. The after-action review that followed took 6 weeks. The central finding was one that theater commanders had been reluctant to put in writing before the engagement. The U.S. Navy's current loadout configuration for Gulf patrols was not optimized for mass drone intercept. The SM-6 to ESSM ratio in Gravely's magazine had been calibrated for a combined air and surface threat. Against 26 slow-moving drones, a pure low and slow air threat, the available ESSM count was insufficient for a zero-leakage defense. The review recommended a dedicated drone intercept loadout option for convoy escort missions in the Gulf, incorporating additional ESSM quad packs and integration of the Navy's laser weapon system, the Helios, on escort vessels operating in threat areas. The Helios system had been in development for years. It was available. It had not been installed on destroyers operating in the Gulf. It costs approximately 50 cents per shot to fire a laser weapon. It costs $1.2 million per ESSM. 26 targets. The math writes itself. Iran's public statement, issued 8 hours after the attack, denied any involvement. The drones were described as belonging to resistance forces, operating in response to American aggression. The IRGC made no direct claim. The modified dhow that had served as one of the launch platforms was found beached on a sandbar 14 nautical miles from its departure point, already on fire. The AIS transponder had been thrown overboard. The container mounts for the drone launchers had been partially burned. A preliminary forensic assessment identified components consistent with Iranian origin. USNS Wally Shira was diverted to Bahrain for repair. Her cargo, the strike ordnance for the carrier air wing, arrived 2 weeks late to its destination. USNS Guadalupe's deck fire had been contained. She completed her fuel delivery mission. USS Gravely completed her patrol. Petty Officer 2nd Class James Okafor was buried in Columbus, Ohio, 14 days after the engagement. His daughter, 7 years old, held the flag. And somewhere in the IRGC's planning center, the engagement data from that morning was being fed into the next planning cycle. 22 drones shot down. 4 made it through. 4 out of 26 was a 15% success rate against a prepared, alerted defense. Against an unalerted convoy, one without general quarters called 4 minutes early by a merchant mariner who noticed something wrong with her radar, that success rate would have been significantly higher. The Shahed 136 cost $20,000 per unit. The convoy carried assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The calculus of drone warfare in the Persian Gulf had just been written in an after-action report in a Navy that was still thinking about missiles. Stay vigilant, stay informed. This is Navy Beacon, and we'll see you in the next one.